Good afternoon and welcome to our regular council meeting for Monday, January 23rd, 2023. I'll call the meeting to order at 5 p.m. First item on the agenda, Land Acknowledgement. The town of Coaldale acknowledges that we are gathered on the lands of the Blackfoot peoples of the Canadian Plains and pays respect to the Blackfoot peoples past, present, and future, while recognizing their cultural heritage, beliefs, and relationship to the land. The town of Coaldale is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region Number 3. Agenda item 1.2, Conflict of Interest Declaration, Pecuniary and Non-pecuniary. Are there any in the room this afternoon? None declared, thank you. Agenda item 2.1, the acceptance of the agenda for regular council meeting January 23rd, 2023. Are there any additions to the agenda? I have one deletion. Our delegation that was supposed to be here at 5:05 p.m. is going to be postponed. Our RCMP liaison, a member that was supposed to be in attendance, had a scheduling conflict. So we're going to hopefully reschedule that for the end of February or second meeting in February. There's no additions to the agenda. Can I get someone to make a motion to accept it as presented, or amended, I should say? Deputy Mayor Pickering, any discussion? All those in favor? Carried unanimously, thank you. Moving on to agenda item 3.1, the regular council meeting minutes from January 9th, 2023. Were there any error or omissions? Councillor Saylor.
Thank you. On item 13.1, you have that Councillor Jason Beekman left the room, but that was me. So we just need to change that.
Okay, thank you. Any other errors or omissions? Seeing none, can I get someone to make a motion to adopt the minutes from January 9th as amended? Councillor Reese, any discussion? All those in favor? Carried unanimously, thank you. Moving on to bylaws and policies, agenda items 7.1, the domestic animal bylaw. That'll be 862-R-01-23, and we have our Director of Growth and Investment, Cameron Mills, presenting. Cameron, when you're ready, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mayor Van Rijn. Council, pleased this evening to be here to speak to you about a proposed domestic animal bylaw for the town, bylaw 862-R-01-23. This is fundamentally simply an update. Well, there's two things. It is first simply an update of the existing domestic animal bylaw, which is a bylaw that the town has had sort of active for any number of years. This was most recently updated to accommodate the town's annexation, to accommodate the parcels coming in from annexation into that bylaw. And one of the things we have found here in looking at the bylaw is that the way it's done now is you have the existing bylaw and then you have an amending bylaw which adds things to it. It's a very complicated way to read it. So what we're proposing here is simply incorporating those amendments into the actual bylaw so that we have a single document that's much easier to read and understand. So that's item one. And item two is, while we're doing the domestic animal bylaw, we thought it would be an appropriate time to provide for council with an opportunity to consider the potential for changes to the bylaw. And so what we've provided here is looking at something that has been raised to myself in a planning and development capacity a few times over the years, and is also, as I understand, regularly brought up with Mark Anderson and the CPOs, which is the possibility of consideration for the ownership of goats in larger residential properties within town. So currently the domestic animal bylaw limits ownership of domestic animals to dogs, cats, and up to 2 rabbits per parcel. And some municipalities do consider additional types of pets being made available. And so the way we've written the bylaw, and what is provided for council's consideration is an amendment to that bylaw which would allow for the ownership of up to 2 goats on residential parcels which are over 1 acre in size. This is simply for council's consideration. To have this discussion, we felt it made sense to simply provide the bylaw with that option, and if council so chooses to remove that, we can simply amend the bylaw without that. Speaking, we did provide in the staff report, and I won't go through it in detail, but Mark Anderson did provide some commentary there with respect to inquiries and some of the reasons why goats are generally viewed in a positive light from his perspective. Consideration for council is that the issue of allowing goats is again simply for your consideration. We're happy to discuss the issue here. What we've provided for it, I believe, Len, I had a map that just to show. So just a sort of a quick map. This outlines all of the parcels in town, residential parcels in town, which are over 1 acre in size. So this would be parcel zoned country, any of our country residential parcels that meet that 1 acre threshold, or an urban reserve parcel. A number of these parcels within the urban reserve would in fact already allow for them, falling under the sort of the grandfather clause that exists in the existing bylaw. So when I would look at this, I would suggest that the actual number of new parcels that might be incorporated to this might be in the range of maybe about 40 parcels in town, and I wouldn't expect, given 40 parcels, that we would see more than 2 or 3 potentially take up the opportunity. It is a fairly specialized watch for people. I wouldn't expect every parcel to immediately come out.
And then some of these parcels you're talking about, they already are able to have horses and cows, right? Because I've seen them in some areas.
Yeah, absolutely. So anyone who was incorporated into the town who previously had those types of uses, as long as they maintain those uses, can continue to have those types of uses. It's a fairly onerous thing if it comes up for the CPOs to actually, that they would actually have to do research on a parcel. But generally speaking, this isn't the type of thing that generates a lot of complaints for the town. So it's not something that they spend a lot of their time actively policing. So from town's view, and again, the way administration has approached this is to say that of the possible changes to the domestic animal bylaw, the issue of goats is a simpler one to consider than the issue of things like horses, and certainly the question of chickens, which is a much more complex matter that would be sort of rigorously debated. What we're proposing here is that if council does want to provide some consideration to it, we could look at it as a pilot project, see how it goes for a year. If it's something that doesn't create a lot of nuisance or is viewed positively, we can extend it and then start to look at other changes to the bylaw down the road. But again, this is really something that if this is something council wants us to consider, we're prepared to move forward with that. Alternatively, easy enough for us to amend the bylaw. With that, I pass it back to council for any questions.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Reese.
Thank you, Mayor Van Rijn, due to Ken. So on the decision options, the first option, we can let them have a goat on properties greater than 1 acre in size, but option 3, same thing, except for it's a wider variety of animals. But what if someone just wants like a horse and not goats? Like what would that mean if we went with option 1, for instance?
So with option 1, we wouldn't be allowing horses. With option 3, if you wanted to explore option 3, you could take option 3 and then add horses, for example, to the bylaw for that consideration. Administration's position is simply that given that we're moving relatively quickly here, we think goats are a good sort of starting point for the discussion, but certainly we could amend the bylaw in any way that council sees fit.
Councillor Avery.
Thank you, Mayor. So a couple questions. So how are we going to control it? Are they going to have to be licensed? 2, who's going to enforce it? So the goats get out, who's going to enforce the goats getting out? And question 3, who's going to be liable when the goats get out and somebody hits it on 17th Street?
Good question. So to answer the question of liability, the liability for a goat would be no different than the liability for a dog or a cat. So I'm not forecasting any particular issues with that. As far as licensing goes, our view on this was that there's such a limited number of properties that to spend the administrative time and money to create a licensing system for them is probably more onerous and expensive than simply saying. So the way the regulation is structured is simply so that if someone requests approval from the town, we simply provide them in writing an approval that we can withdraw at our discretion. So if someone asks for permission to have goats, the CPOs look at the property, deem it feasible, provide them that approval, and then it turns out that the owners of the goats are not behaving in a manner which allows for where they're generating a lot of complaints, they have the opportunity to remove that permission.
And then one follow-up, so that one of the quotes in here says about the noxious weeds and weed control. I believe when they eat it, they just move the noxious weed from one spot to another spot, because when they go to the washroom, it just moves the seed from where they ate the noxious weed to farther down, which could be onto the neighbor's property. So I don't know if it is truly a alternative to chemically spraying the weed and getting to the root and eliminating the plant.
That's not an area of expertise for me. That was provided by.
Thanks, Councilor.
Councillor Chapman.
Thank you, Mayor Cam. A couple of things here. Number one, you mentioned the pilot project idea, and would you be able to describe that more at length? I think what I see from it, though, if you're asking councils for direction on a pilot project, and in a year from now the recommendation is that the pilot project may not work, it would be difficult for us as council, especially, and for the owners of the animals in question, to have to remove them based on a council decision on that matter. And I would feel for the family and of course in some cases being youth that are raising these either for 4-H projects or for otherwise. The second thing is with regards to the lands in question. Several things come to my mind. One being that the annexed lands, we grandfathered those eligibilities in simply because those lands are really they're not developed lands, or they're not lands that they're kind of like an urban reserve, where we don't have any real area structure plans established for them as of yet. The second part to the other lands that might be more as infill lands that we've seen on 17th Street and more in the southeast part of town. As you may say, that some of those lands have had, livestock on them for 30, 40 years or more. With that, could you see those lands continue to have those animals on there if a developer wants to come in and redevelop those lands, or there's a new area structure plan development that might occur that might change the eligibility for those 1-acre lots?
Well, thank you. So first part of the question with respect to the pilot project, this is simply the way administratively we envision it. If council has a desire to more broadly, let me maybe rewind. The regulations that are in place, all these types of regulations are fluid. It's been a long time since the town has had a broader discussion of these regulations. So the regulations that exist, they exist for whatever reason the council of the day would have decided them. So there's always an opportunity to revisit them. So what we're looking at it is saying, if we want to consider revisiting them, it's our opinion that starting with goats is probably the least impactful of these choices. And we look at it to say, well, if it goes well in a year and then council decides they want to have a broader question about, well, should folks be able to have horses or chickens or anything else, then we have some experience with a sort of a more minor issue to base our discussion on. So from that perspective, I think it makes sense. When you consider that, obviously a hard thing to give someone something and then to take it away. The flip side of that would be that anyone gets permission, it would be very clear that this is what we're doing, and that we have that opportunity to, if it's not working out, we find it's a nuisance and neighbors find it's a problem, then perhaps we decide we didn't like the test and we're going to remove it, so everyone would understand that at the start of the project. Certainly a difficult thing for people to deal with, but part of life, unfortunately. So.
That answer your question, Bill?
Yeah.
To a large extent, one final question on that. If council so chooses to go ahead, would administration or in bylaw be able to come up with some type of solution to Councillor Avery's question about animals that get out of the yard? So would there be a fence restrictions or requirements that they have to be of a certain type or a certain material or height and all that?
I think we would, from our perspective, we would treat them the same. Managing a goat and managing a dog are fundamentally the same from that perspective. So we would expect landowners to come up with their own ways to make sure that their animal is not getting out, and if it is, if we find that someone is not doing a job of that, then it's pretty simple to say, okay, this is not responsible ownership, so we're removing our permission.
Thank you.
Lana, can I get you to put the map up again, please? So, Cam, of those 40 parcels that are 1 acre or larger that you mentioned, like we're talking about the ones along 18th Ave that are urban reserve now, right? There's a country residential, those ones.
Oh, yes, up here, yeah. These are, I don't know why those aren't highlighted, those should be. I did a query with the GIS map, so
Okay.
yeah, those would be theoretical. Well, there's certainly the ones that are urban reserve.
So they can have horses, and they're right now. And the ones over by the chicken farms along 17th, so of those, and if you could just circle around the that development that's going to be taking place.
Right. So this is the south area structure plan area, right there. And so this parcel right here, has like.
And then to the north of there as well.
Sort of to the north. Right there. This one, this long one.
No, to the north. Like, where's the canal?
Right there.
Right there.
Yeah.
Okay. So those can be taken off the table right away because he's going to be developing that.
Yeah, and again, this is just what a query
Right.
comes up with. So, for example, like these lots here, this is in Parkside. This would not actually be eligible.
Right.
This is road allowance.
So if you were to take all those off, I think that would cut that number down considerably.
Sorry,
And-
so this actual number here is more than 40. So 40 was an estimate.
Right.
Based on
Okay. So then I went to go look at some of those areas where we would be permitting. If you look across the road from some of those places, they already got cows and horses in that area. There's one right along 845 that had cattle in there this year. And City of Lethbridge, they allowed goats to come in for grass control, weed control. And even though I think Councillor Avery has a point with, to use his term when they go to the washroom, that there's seeds that get transferred, but I think for the town, I think we could do something here where, like, normally I would say, okay, one goat, but goats are, I guess, a sociable animal, so you got to have 2 of them, no more than 2. And for those large 1 acre plus lots, personally, I think give it a try. Any other questions? Councillor Pickering, or Deputy Mayor Pickering.
Thank you, Mayor Van Rijn. So we know that development that is already in works, did anybody approach him because if he built right up to them yards, right, would he have any say in this? Like, did he get a chance to speak his mind on that?
Well, we would, depending where this goes tonight, if we pass first reading, then we'll have a public hearing on that.
Correct.
So then,
Okay.
and then we can get resident input.
Yeah.
I'm okay with that. Because that would give all the residents around there, because I know, like, you're talking all the parcels south of 30th where all them people live. Yeah, that when that got annexed in, they knew that. So basically, we're changing it for that little area in there.
Yes.
So I'm okay with that.
Okay, any,
Just a question through
just
to
one
that.
second, Councillor Reese,
Oh,
please.
no, go ahead.
Okay, go ahead.
Mayor, just a question about the land use bylaw and whether that would eventually have to be amended to allow for such inclusion. It would not.
Councillor Reese?
Thank you, Mayor Van Rijn. I would be in support of option 1, so I would like to make a motion that council provide first reading to domestic animal bylaw 862-R-1-23 as presented.
And just to check with the municipal clerk, there's one notation. Do we have the right number?
It should be 01-23.
Okay. So just if you could reread that, the 01, did you catch that in yours?
No.
Okay, so if you could just repeat your motion and add a 0 in front of the 1.
Okay. That council provide first reading to domestic animal bylaw 862-R-01-23 as presented.
Thank you.
Yep.
Any further discussion on that motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Councillor Avery's opposed. Motion is carried. Thank you. So, Cameron, when would we bring that back in the public hearing portion?
I would have to check it would be one of the February dates.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to new business agenda item 8.1. We have the in-town busing agreement for Palliser School Division. We have our Chief Financial Officer and Deputy CAO, Kyle Beauchamp, presenting. Kyle, when you're ready, the floor is yours.
Okay, thanks and good evening, Council. So, for you today is the busing agreement between the Town of Coleo and Palliser School Division. This is an annual agreement that we bring back to Council each year. This would cover the 2023 to 2024 school year. This busing agreement is designated for those who live closer than 2.4 kilometers from their school that they're attending. They are eligible for busing provided if they buy a bus pass. All those students who are outside of the 2.4 kilometer radius are eligible for free busing under the Alberta Education Transportation Grant. Some numbers on this agreement. The number of bus passes Palliser is proposing to increase from 125 to 130. Total demand last year for bus passes was 147 based on the waiting list. Financial impact, in this report, it's recommended to keep the annual bus pass cost to the resident the same at $260 per pass. Again, so no change from last year. So the net subsidy from the Town of Coleo would be just under $15,000, which would fit within the town's current operating budget. With that being said, I'll turn it back to Council for any questions on this.
Thank you, Kyle. I have a question before I open it up to council. So they're going to open it up from increase from 125 to 130, but last year we had 147. So the 17 that are on the waiting list, can you explain why Palliser can't increase the capacity to take it and everyone that wants to be able to use the service?
So there's two buses, there's two routes, I believe 2 buses. And in talking to Palliser, at what point are they able to add another bus or additional capacity to help make sure there's no waiting list or allow all the students onto the bus? There is kind of that threshold limit where there isn't enough capacity on the current buses for 147 kids, but there isn't enough demand to add another bus at this time. They've also said that there's challenges for them into adding another bus, and that it's hard for them to sometimes get drivers, so they would have staffing kind of issues with that. And that's kind of what I've got back from Palliser and quizzing them on on this agreement. So they seem to kind of add a couple bus passes every year based on capacity, but they don't have enough capacity to go up to 150 to make sure everybody gets on it.
Deputy Mayor Pickering.
Thank you, Mayor Van Rijn. Through to Kyle. So the new school is opening, I believe, in March 2024.
I can't comment on when that is.
If they do, that this is going to double or triple, as the mayor said, because it's going to be from grade 7 up to grade 12. So now we're going to have 2 more years that you're throwing over across the tracks that aren't going now, that them kids are mostly walking. So how are we going to deal with this?
So this busing agreement only applies to current routes. Palliser is working on adding a different route when the new school comes online.
Okay,
So that will be something council can likely see in next year with the new agreement, that Palliser will be working on an additional route because they are expecting additional demand. So I have asked them about that, and they are working on it for when the new school does open.
Okay,
Thank you. Any other questions, comments for Kyle? Councillor Chapman.
Thank you, Mayor. My other question, follow up to the mayor's query on the numbers. If council were to recommend that we would add even 10 more people. Now I'm surmising that the reason they haven't, they're only moving the threshold to 130 is because those buses maybe are not full all the time. Would you concur with that thought, that the buses are not full all the time?
I wouldn't. I would just say that Palliser runs the buses. They're aware of their capacity and the restraints and the routes they have. When we quiz them about opening up additional capacity or whatnot, they come back and say, this is the capacity we have available to offer. So as far as if the town really wanted to push and try and get everybody onto the bus, then it becomes a discussion with Palliser of maybe the town's financial commitment has to be higher to get another route, to get another bus, to get another driver. But that's kind of, when we ask Palliser, they say this is kind of what you have, and unfortunately at this time it's the capacity that they provided us with.
Can I respond? So my concern with both routes is that when you look at the maps, neither of them will cover Westgate or Waterfront, and neither of them cover Parkside. So for the mileage that they're charging, I'd be willing to pay more if miles have to be changed to add more those 2 areas in there. I think those are essential areas in Coaldale that are without bus service, and yet you get all of Land O'Lakes and of course all the way around Cottonwood, but Parkside and Waterfront or Westgate are not covered at all.
Yeah, I can't speak to the logistics on how the bus routes go. I'm not an expert in that, but anybody in Coaldale who is within 2.4 kilometers of their school is eligible to get on the bus. So those people I can't interpret the maps, but the people in, say, Parkside or Westgate, or they are eligible for buses. We do have those students or parents who do buy the bus passes that live in those communities. So bus passes do go on sale July 1st, so it's obviously a closure stat holiday, so I believe it's July 4th. So we do encourage any resident who is looking for a bus pass to come down to the town of Coaldale first week of July, come buy your bus pass. Most often those who are on the waiting list are those who are trying to buy their bus pass at the end of August before school comes in. So it's one of those situations where if you come in July, you should be able to get your bus pass, and you should have your kid on there. Is the best recommendation we can give as administration to the public.
I guess my follow-up to all of that is that if we were to cap it at 147, I'm sure that we would be filling the bus, that third that third bus with Kitchen Parkside and Waterfront. Just throwing that in.
Kalen had a comment?
Just when we had our the board meeting with Palliser School Division, I just wanted to add a detail. My takeaway from the busing discussion in that meeting is that council, if the desire was to increase the number of seats available for students, they would need to write a letter to Palliser. And the cost consequence for the town could be impacted if you have a bus that's only half full, which would mean that the size of your subsidy would increase. And they try to keep the number of buses as full as possible so that the amount of money per student is as low as possible. It's like an airline. If you only run a plane that's half full, the cost of the ticket goes up. And so we're at that awkward stage where there isn't quite enough volume to have 3 fully utilized buses. It's not impossible, but the way around it, because this is a cost recovery program for Palliser, the town's subsidy would likely go up if council requested that third bus. Otherwise, you're going to have to greatly increase the amount per ticket from the current $260. That's the trade-off of having now 3 drivers and 3 buses and 3 fuel bills. And so, their metrics, they want to approve the third bus as it gets closer to being full than having one that only has 10 or 15 students in it because of the pricing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I realize that. I just want to ensure that our community is serviced to the level that they should get, even if they have to pay. That's certainly something, but we'll have to cross that bridge when the next agreement comes up.
With that being said, though, Councillor Chapman, I think we should turn that stone over. Like, I would like to find out what that cost would be. So if it's just a matter of sending an email, I think we should look into that, because the reason I bring that up is I remember last year I had one family that reached out and said they just moved to town and they didn't know about this pass thing and you had to apply for it. So it's unfortunate that, and I can ask Kyle too, do we advertise that this has to be, their names have to be put forth? Do we do that on social media, or is it just up to them to do this? Or?
We've advertised it before, yeah.
Okay. So if we can maybe request a quotation on what that would do to our payment level. Like currently we're paying $260.
Yeah, when I did ask, I'm just opening up my email from, I did ask Palliser on this. They said they'd be hard pressed to add another bus. Drivers become an issue as well. So I could ask the question, what is the cost to add a third bus? There's no problem with that. Assuming cost isn't a factor, just finding a driver, I can report back on that issue as well if that's something council.
Yeah, we can do that by way of motion, and then we can find out, because I agree with Councillor Chapman that we open up more, I think we can surpass that 130 mark. So.
Because for next year, they are looking at additional capacity too, just to keep that in mind with the new school as well. So.
Okay, appreciate that. Any further questions, comments? Councillor Avery.
Thank you, Mayor. Just kind of tweak something for me. Is this maybe an opportunity to start looking at our own type of busing service? Because if we're already putting in $48,000 a year into this between the passes that we're selling, and then we're always looking for rides into Lethbridge for people. So between the school times, we could be offering trips into this city. So I think this could open up a different opportunity, not just for busing our children, but for other citizens as well. So I think we could look at it in a little bit bigger picture once we get that other pricing.
Okay, so for tonight's discussion, we'll just ask for the quotation on what that would cost for an additional bus. Would you care to sponsor that motion?
Sure.
Okay, Councillor Avery makes a motion that, Kaylin, you can help me with that. Sure. On the wording for that.
I think something as simple as direct administration to reach out to Palliser School Division to provide a cost on adding a third bus for those students within the 2.4 kilometer hour.
Thank you. And then back to the original motion that we need, that council approve the 2023-2024 busing agreement with Palliser School Division. Are those two motions going to conflict, or the intent is clear?
The intent is clear. Yeah. Logistically, even Palliser wouldn't be able to add another bus for September, I assume, anyways. I'll get the information back as soon as I can.
Yeah, we can ask the question.
Yeah.
Councillor Chapman, you had your hand up? I'll make the motion. Okay, thank you. Motion by Councillor Chapman. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you.
Can we call the question on Councillor Avery's motion? I think I just read it out loud, but I don't know. If it was
Yes, okay. To back up to Councillor Avery's motion, I forgot to call the question on that. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Thank you, Kaylin. Moving on to agenda item 8.2, the Civic Square Facility Rental Rates Proposal. We have our Director of Recreation and Community Services, Russ Tanner, presenting. Russ, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mayor and Council, for having me for this. There have been a number of inquiries about the rentable space at Civic Square, and so the purpose for this report in front of you is to provide council with some proposed rates and fees for that rentable space at Civic Square, and provide you an opportunity for feedback. As you're aware, Civic Square was built and developed for some rentable space. There's a rental room there for meetings, and then there also is the atrium, which is quite an attractive large space. There's a document that's attached to this report named Civic Square Facility Rental Rates Proposed, and within that document are those proposed rates that were arrived at, along with some additional information as describing the space and also the services that would be accompanying the space for each rental. On the second page of that report, what we've done there is we've provided you with what the rental rates are for some other facilities that are around. There's the Galt Museum Viewing Gallery, often used for weddings and large events. There's also the Lethbridge, and that's probably the high end, certainly, the Galt Museum on a rentable space similar to that. The Lethbridge Library also has a theater gallery that is a little bit smaller, but some comparable space there with those rates. And then there's also Lethbridge City Hall foyer, just so that it kind of shows you where these proposed rates that administration is putting forward in front of you kind of landed and why they landed there. And so what we do have is a general rental for Civic Square meeting room at $20 per hour, and a not-for-profit rate at $15 per hour. Is what's proposed. Civic Square atrium at a general per hour rate of $95 per hour, and a not-for-profit rate at $60 per hour, along with an option for a day rate at $760 per day, or a not-for-profit rate per day at $480 per day. And so we'd like to provide this information to council. And certainly our recommendation is that council approve the approved rates or proposed rates for Civic Square meeting room and Civic Square atrium with any additional direction as you see fit.
Thank you. I'll open up for questions, comments. For myself, I personally like the rate schedule. My question to you, Russ, is this something that we're going to revisit after the first year or something like that? Or?
Absolutely, it's a great question, and certainly something that is normal, especially opening up a new facility like this. I do believe that we kept those rates at a very fair, kind of towards the lower end, to try to get that excitement and use. And as the space starts to be used, I think people will find that it is very inviting. The technology that's gone into it, some that our staff have been a huge part of. I believe is going to create a very, what do I want to say, the word, a very attractive situation where there will be multiple bookings coming back. People may attend weddings there and see what it can do, and it'll only push for more weddings in the future. And as there's more of a demand, we can certainly look at those rates. And at the same time, we'll also have a better idea of how much staff time it's taking to get us to that point, how the technology is working, and work out some of those bugs. So I think it would be very worthwhile revisiting this, 12 or 18 months later, and looking at those rates.
So if I was to rent that for $760, I just get a key and I go do everything myself, or is there staff involved?
So what we would do is ahead of time, we would do an orientation to show how to use all the equipment, and then yes, there would be a key. And so at this point in time, it's a self setup and take down at that rate, But with staff being able to show a person that will be using the facility how to use the facility, and also there will be an opportunity for them to have somebody contacted in there momentarily if anything goes wrong.
So that orientation would take place during normal staff hours then?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Any further? Councillor Beekman.
Thank you, Mayor. In the rate comparisons for Lethbridge City Hall foyer, you just have only available after business hours. For the Civic Square, are we gonna, is the atrium available to be rented during business hours?
So that's a really good question, Councillor Beekman. And the reason why I didn't put that specific on there at this point in time is because I think it depends on what type of booking it is, right? I think anytime we get a booking request in, there's a conversation that goes on as to what's needed, what's required. There's certainly certain types of bookings that I think and can foresee being able to happen during business hours. And then there's certain ones like a wedding that would not be, right? But we didn't put that on there in main part just so that we could have that conversation and make sure that they're fully aware of what the facility is, what the traffic is like, and that they feel they can make it work, then we wouldn't avoid a booking.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Reese.
Thank you, Mayor. Is there a wider range of the options of what can happen during the day, since the town office is technically upstairs, so it won't be as disturbing or disruptive to your guys' work?
Well, I guess like I don't know that there's a wide range. I think that there are certainly certain situations and circumstances that certainly can. Maybe a user group that comes to mind, and that's just me thinking this right now, but would be like the Chamber of Commerce, and maybe some of their things they do during a day could, very much complement business hours. But other businesses, if they're wanting to do a luncheon and bring in some catering and maybe use the future coffee shop that's there, those would be the ones that I'd see working. What I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but Councillor Reese, what you're getting at is if we're going to put a concert in there, that would certainly be a cross-contamination of work that's being done on the second floor. We would certainly avoid things like that.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Chapman.
Well, thank you, Mayor. A couple of questions that come to mind, Russ. One was with respect to the meeting rooms on the main level, on the main level of the atrium there. So if I sit on a committee, and we want to use that room, then it would cost the committee the $15, I guess, because we'd be nonprofit to use that room.
So yes, so from a staffing perspective, other than functions of our own that we sponsor, we would be requesting there be a fee unless it comes through council, right? So we ourselves would not be able to, that would have to be a council determination. In other words, the person renting the facility will be the bill. That's kind of how it works right now. And this is kind of probably a part of a bigger conversation that we hope to have later this year. As a community services department, we plan on bringing all of our rates and fees to you. These ones had that in mind, so I'm not looking at changing these that early. But coming with all our rates and fees and really a booking and allocation policy. And within those booking allocation policies is partial conversation also as to what is free and what is not, and what the process is to get a free booking. What I would suggest is most municipalities, especially of this size and bigger, are certainly going to a structure in that even that any event that's looking for subsidies look at sponsorship, probably asking the municipality for that free booking, because those rental rates are trying to recover utilities, costs to use and stuff. But I'll just get back to the straight and simple answers, is that we would book it with a fee unless directed differently from council.
I guess the reason I asked that question is that all of us are appointed to various committees of council or part of the community. Like, we'll just use Chamber of Commerce as an example. So we do have representatives, we do have appointed people from council on the Chamber of Commerce. So if our representative wanted to utilize one of those rooms, and or the chamber said that'd be a great place to meet, would you have some kind of a policy on that, just so that there's clarity as to who's really booking the room, sort of a thing, right? Who's part of it out? And another one is, like, I'll use the example of the handy ride as well. Meeting space is very limited in Coaldale, as we all know, and I think that there would be appetite to meet at Civic Square. I'm not too sure that some of these groups have those kinds of dollars in their budgets to pay a monthly $15 a month. Just throwing that out there. But
just a comment I want to make on that, then, Councilor Chapman, is that room holds how many people? 8?
No, I believe there's 12 chairs and there's room for a few
in that community room.
So I think, it actually is on here. Meeting room is, it'll accommodate 10 at the table and up to 6 around the perimeter.
Okay, so because we have to be careful, like,
Yeah,
we're only
well,
talking about the community room. Like, we don't want people, if they want to sit around round tables in the atrium portion, then they got to pay that atrium per hour fee. And so just that little meeting room. So like the chamber, for instance, I wouldn't be big enough to hold a meeting in.
So those are kind of things we should be talking about now, so we don't have those difficulties later on down the road. And I think that even in a year from now, when you review this with council, I think one of the other ones is, the types of groups that might or might not be eligible to rent the large meeting space at the atrium, in the atrium, and maybe have to go somewhere like the Gem of the West or Community Center.
Yeah, and Councillor Chapman, you make a really good point, and I guess I just refer back to, like, certainly staff will take council's direction on those booking allocations. I'm looking at reviewing the full rates and fees actually as early as May or as late as June of this year in preparation for the new facility. And certainly we can bring with that booking allocation policy a little more information to detail to answer the questions you're asking now. But you make it a good point that there's a balance in that if we're providing free rentals, it's a slippery slope to go down, because every time you provide a free rental there, you're also now got space that could have been booked out for a fee that is no longer booked out for a fee, or we also have other space in town that already has certain people with agreements meeting for free. And if we pull them over to this facility, that facility doesn't get used, nor this facility in some cases. So there's a balance, but that balance is something that administration will be looking to council for direction, and we'll come prepared to try to make that as clear as clear as possible. Right. Makes sense? Like, it's a tough one.
Yeah.
I can tell you right now, I won't come with any perfect formula. However, certainly look for some guidelines that'll help everybody understand.
Kaylin had a comment.
With respect to the committees, and I think Councillor Chapman said most of what I was going to mention, but I will just say council does have the ability to make an exception for town-related committees for that space, as compared to, say, for example, Coaldale Minor Hockey, which is nonprofit, but arm's length and apart from the town. So where council wants to draw that line, that can be up for discussion, but you can draw a sub-distinction for the town or the committees where there is council representation or as a town committee. Thank you.
Then as far as that community room goes, do we have money in the audio video budget that we passed to outfit that room with a screen? And
I'm not aware of the answer to that. I do know there is some equipment that's right now being determined where it could be best used.
Because that's set up, roughed in for putting like a big screen LED, and then somebody with a laptop can plug in from the table to do a PowerPoint. Go ahead, Kayla.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember the community rooms on the main floor, if we had budgeted at this time for a screen, or is that something that we would phase in? One of the concerns was just after hours security, having a TV like that, but it is roughed in and you can purchase a screen for $1,000. Like, it's not a significant amount of money, but there was a security consideration that we were mindful of, but it is set up for that purpose.
Security as in someone's going to steal it, you mean?
Yeah.
Okay. Any further questions, comments? And I'm looking for someone to look at the available options and decide what we want to do. I'll read what the available option is. That council approve the proposed rates for the Civic Square meeting room and Civic Square atrium with any additional direction as seen fit. Do we have any additional direction?
Mayor, I'll make that motion, just with that, maybe to depending on administration's thoughts moving forward, there might be a quick short review with council in spring, as you said.
So we'll do that automatically. So is it safe to say then that we can say that council approved the proposed rates for Civic Square meeting room and Civic Square atrium as presented? Councillor Saylor makes that motion. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you, Russ. Moving on to agenda item 8.3, the Civil Kit Municipal Engagement Platform and Sunny South News Subscription Fund. We have our Manager of Government Relations, Jonathan Wensveen, presenting. Jonathan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Council. So the purpose of this staff report is twofold. The first point that we're bringing to Council's attention is that administration's recently made an operational decision to transition from its current online public engagement platform, Let's Connect Coaldale, to a new, better value for dollar online platform called Civicit Municipal Engagement Platform. And the reason why we came to the conclusion that this would be a good transition is, first of all, this platform can handle everything that the old platform could be used for. But secondly, and most importantly, this platform is designed by the current developer of our website, so it integrates with the website in a much more natural way. It's often been pointed out to administration that the town of Coaldale has two different websites, right? The Let's Connect and then the main website. And we feel that by transitioning to this new public engagement platform, a lot of that confusion will go away, and people will be more easily able to find the public engagement pieces that we post through the actual website. Then finally, it's just a cheaper alternative to our current public engagement platform. Currently, we're paying about $10,000 a year, and this one, it'll cost $7,600 in the first year to set up, but then or $7,400 in the first year to set up, but then moving forward, it'll only be $2,400 a year to run. And that's partly because we're a kind of an early adopter of this platform, but also because of Cam's talented negotiating skills. So with the cost savings, this brings us to the second part of the staff report. We're recommending or proposing to council setting up what we're calling a Sunny South News subscription fund. And the reason for this is because during budget deliberations in the fall, it was decided that we weren't going to continue the blanket edition pilot project that we had been running. And so as an alternative, we're suggesting that we take the cost savings generated from this transition, set up a fund for anybody who wants to continue to receive the Sunny South News each week by purchasing a subscription for them. And obviously this would be directed more so towards the seniors community as they kind of rely more on mainstream or traditional means of media. They may not have a social media account and get their news that way. So this would be kind of in lieu of not being able to provide that blanket subscription that we've been doing. And with that, I'll leave it to council for questions.
Okay, thank you. I just have a question before I open up to council. So this is a very cool idea that you and Cameron came up with. My question is, doing this compared to a blanket coverage, and say if we pick the second Tuesday of every month, if we were to do a blanket coverage, like historically the town's done that in the past, I think it was quarterly. So what would be the cost comparison? I know the first year with this new platform, it's going to cost more, but once it's all up and running, and it's only going to cost, I think he said $2,400 a year. What would it cost? And I'm not a fair question because I know you probably don't know the answer, but to compare doing the free subscription or paying, you pick a Tuesday, whether it be the second Tuesday of the month or the third Tuesday of the month, and that would be the issue where the town would do their stories kind of thing. And do you have any idea on that?
I know it would be more than the projected cost of $7,600 a year. But that said, I don't know how much more. It would be significantly less than what we were doing previously, which was setting out an edition every week. So it would be somewhere between $7,600 and I think that the blanket pilot project was about $48,000 a year. So it would be in the mid-range between those two numbers, but I'd have to look into it to get specifics, and I could get back to council about that.
I believe the value is about $2,000 a month, as I recall. So.
For blanket?
So it'd be about 20.
Yeah. So if it was $48,000 to do it every week, the savings from doing it once a month, as I recall, is about 50%.
Kaylin?
But just to clarify, that would have assumed a certain amount of ad space that we would be given as part of that blanket. You're able to blanket the paper without any ad space for less cost than that 2,000. That number is correct for the blanketing as well as the full page of ad space. But if you remove the full page of ad space, I believe the cost to blanket the paper, whatever it happens to be that week, is around that $1,000 mark, $800 to $1,000, depending on the size and the weight relative to the postage. Does that? We can report back on a more precise number, but I'm saying like there is a rate tier between the cost of the postage and the weight of the paper for distributing it as is, as well as the cost of the ad space on top of.
Councillor Avery.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm not quite catching where we're saving the money from. If it's already been taken out of the budget, where are we saving the $2,600 in year one and $7,600 in year two from, and then adding $7,400 in for subscriptions, $7,600 in for subscriptions to Sunny South on something that's already been taken out? I don't understand where the savings should already be here in 2023 of 100%, not these other percentages.
Thanks for the question. So essentially, what's happening here is that because we're transitioning to a new platform, if we weren't made to make that transition, we would just continue on paying $10,000 a year to keep the current platform. But because we're making this transition to a new platform, we'll be saving essentially $7,600 a year after year one. Assuming that if we hadn't done this, or if we don't do this, we'd continue paying $10,000 a year. So the cost savings generated from making this transition stem from the fact that we're no longer going to be paying that $10,000 a year to keep the status quo. Does that help?
Yeah.
Any other questions, comments? Councillor Chapman?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I had difficulty with that paragraph as well, which speaks whereas the town spends approximately. And so where I had difficulty is the $2,400 that you speak about a year for the support. There must be also, I thought that the support was sort of the labor or the maintenance part of it. There must be a fee. I thought there must be a fee that goes along with it as well. Or is that all in?
That's all in.
Wow, okay. So that being said, the town's website will stay the same price. Once you transition everything together, the town's website portion will stay the same,
Yeah,
or
so
will it reduce?
the town's website is not included as part of the public engagement platform. It's paid for under contract, a different contract, essentially. So the only difference between this public engagement platform and the one we're currently using is that it's developed by the same company. But it's totally, in a sense, separate from the existing website. It's basically meant to complement the website by providing these public engagement tools.
Sure. Thank you.
Kaylin?
And just for clarity, the question before council is, does council want to use the savings from one platform to another for subscriptions for the Sunny South News? Like, we're not here to ask, should we go from this platform to that platform? Like, that's, quite operational, but it's more, do you want to use the savings for subscriptions for the Sunny South News as a way to still have some involvement with the Sunny South News, given that we piloted the blanket edition every week for a portion of last year?
So how are we going to get the message out to the people then that don't have access to the internet?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting kind of conundrum in that if they don't see advertising on social media, they won't know about so what we can do is put it in utility bills in our monthly newsletter. And we could also take out some advertising in the Sunny South News, the paper edition that comes out each week to reach the audience that would want the subscriptions.
Okay, thank you. And I'll open it up to anybody from administration. So is there a need to do the blanket coverages anymore if we do this method?
I'll answer that question. One of the reasons why we thought this would be a good approach is because it's a lot more targeted, right? Rather than kind of doing a shotgun style approach. This is more of a scalpel approach. And so those who are really wanting to continue to receive it would be the ones incentivized to reach out to the town, provided they're aware of the program. So it would cut down on the number of people who received a blanket edition but didn't want it coming to their house. And therefore, it would also cut down on waste.
Good point. Councillor Chapman.
Thank you, Mayor. So am I hearing it then that for the subscription then the town would be paying for that person's subscription? That would like one.
Yeah, so I think the way it would work is that somebody would reach out to the town, contact the town office, provide their information to sign up for a subscription. The town would then do that for them.
So would it be helpful then to have a sign-up sheet or at the Sunny South Lodge, for example, or the Villa, or a couple of the other places where you know that people are not getting the newspaper, that they're not getting the media information from the town? Would it be helpful then it's more targeted rather than a blanket thing for the whole town?
Yeah, I think that would actually be a great approach to advertising it for the community that we're trying to reach. So
yeah, and I think having that targeted approach will get that message through, and I support this idea entirely.
At coffee, council coffee we had at Sunny South Lodge last week, I had a lady that thanked us for doing that blanket coverage. I didn't have the heart to tell her that we don't do that anymore. So, Councillor Reese, did you have something to say?
Oh, I was thanking Mayor Van Rijn. I agree with Councillor Chapman on the Sunny South Lodge thing. I think that's a great idea. And I would be willing to make that motion with that amendment. What Bill said, and what Councillor Chapman said.
Okay, so if we do the motion as presented, and then our Jonathan would look after to make sure that the senior homes are targeted, would that be okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so then, go ahead, Kayla.
Just one point of clarification, given that the setup cost is the most in year one, which would be 2023, if council's goes ahead with this, there would be $7,600 in savings to spend in 24, but it wouldn't actually be that much in 23. It would actually be closer to that 2,300. So the amount that you would have available to spend would be that whatever you're spending on the current rate for the portion of 23 that we're in.
Right.
So then, if I can reply back to Karen, with that being said, what if we, instead of doing the subscription this year for the Sunny South residents or anything like that, what if we just gave some of those papers to those old folk homes, or those residents? Sorry.
We'd still have to pay for them though.
Yeah, but we'd have a little bit of money to go towards that, like the 2,400 or whatever.
Well, it would be like the school passes, you would have to sign up for them, and then once they're gone, they're gone. So in 23, like our CAO says, it would be less, but
It'd be a limited amount.
at least it's a start.
In 24.
Yeah.
I guess maybe to that, Mayor, what's your thoughts on this then? If we understand what the difference is of $2,300, is it $2,400 difference this year? What would be your cap for how many subscriptions could you send out this year?
So I did have an
278 subscriptions, right?
That's at the cost, that savings of
That's in 2024.
That's in 2024. So it would be significantly less than that for the first year, 2023.
That's the first come, first served, and then next year it could be
more.
or something to that.
Councillor Beekman?
Just quick math here, it looks like 88 subscriptions of that 2730 a year. So we could do 88 with the savings, right?
That's doable.
And would it be safe to say that if we exceed or we reach that number, it can come back to council to see?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, sounds good. So I'm looking for someone to make a motion that council direct administration to set up a Sunny South News subscription fund with the cost savings generated from transitioning to a new online public engagement platform. Councillor Reese, any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Councillor Avery's opposed. The motion is carried.
Library might be a good spot to advertise as well. Yeah.
Okay, moving on to departmental reports. We have agenda item 9.1. We have Cameron Mills, our Director of Growth and Investment, presenting on the growth and investment for Q4.
Thank you very much, Mayor Van Rijn. So this is my Q4 report for the Growth and Investment Department. Our department represents a variety of functions within the organization. And so the way we've structured our quarterly reports is to look at different things each time we have an opportunity to present to council. And what we've identified as Q4 as being the time to do our annual comparative analysis, which is really a report that comes fundamentally from the economic development and communication side of our operation. We did look at the previous comparative analysis not that long ago. The reason for that was that a number of the published financial statements that come from other municipalities were late in the 2020 year, and so it pushed off the ability to do that report. So this comes from the published and audited financial statements from the municipalities, which would be the 2021 financial year, is the most up-to-date and available information, and so that's where this report draws from. The comparative analysis analyzes data relating to Coaldale's operation and compares that to data of other similarly sized municipalities, as well as our neighboring Lethbridge and Lethbridge County. The purpose of the exercise at its core is to provide context for otherwise complex data so that we can better inform our residents, ratepayers, business owners, visitors, and potential investors of what's happening in Coaldale, how the operation is run, and how Coaldale is performing relative to its peers. We break the information down into categories that are largely derived from questions that either administration or council receive over time. We try to address the most common concerns or the most common questions that we find coming to ratepayers in terms of how the operation is run, and that's where we established initially 4 benchmarks, recently moved to 5, and now we're promoting a 6th benchmark here in this report. So we look at operational expenditures, we look at taxation, we look at assessment, which is to say the value of properties in the municipality, we look at population and growth, and then we looked at executive compensation, which is to say CAO, councillor, and mayor compensation. And then for this report, we've included analysis, as discussed with council at a previous meeting, of crime severity within communities, utilizing the crime severity index, which comes from Statistics Canada, based on the recommendation of the RCMP. The attached PowerPoint presentation, can I just... Anna, is it possible for me to have control?
Yeah, should work.
There we go. I got it. Good. Okay. So I'm rather than going through the report in extreme detail, because I know council is familiar with the report at this time, I'm just going to focus on some highlights, and then if there are questions that council has, I'm happy to get into any of the weeds. Again, an important thing to remember with the report is that we do bring the data in from documents that aren't the towns. We want to make sure that we have really good clarity with respect to the fact that this is not us creating any of this information. It's pulling information from public sources, but it's doing it in a way that makes gives the reader an opportunity to understand it a little better and to not have to do that work themselves. None of the benchmarks should be considered as a standalone sort of be-all and end-all of the analysis of any particular issue, but we do think it is important information that people are going to want to have access to. The way we approach this project, again, this is a unique thing for Coaldale. Other municipalities don't do these types of reports. It's something we're very proud of. We try to remain relatively consistent year over year. We don't want to see this sort of cherry-picking information that's favorable for the town. These are categories that we think people are interested in. Once a category is added, we're reluctant to remove it, but that's the same reason why we don't want to sort of greatly increase the report year over year. So beginning here, I'll just zoom in a little bit. This is, I know that's too much. So beginning here, we look at operational expenditures in a couple of other categories. And what this table provides is information with respect to how the town overall expenditures look in these 2021 audited financial statements. And then it provides some context to those numbers, looking at them, for example, on a per capita basis. Looking at our overall operation spending, you find that Coaldale, compared to its peers, spends a relatively low amount, spending less than, being one of the few municipalities that spends less than $2,000 per capita on its operations. And this year we're at $1,771 per person. Only Blackfalds is lower by about $100. Blackfalds is with a population of 11,530 is substantially larger than Coaldale. One of the things that always tends to stand out for Coaldale is our salaries, wages, and benefits expense at $648 per person is substantially lower than our peers. I believe the average value in that category is for towns is around $850. So we have a substantially lower number than what is common. One thing for this year, our total revenue is up relative to previous years. A lot of that difference is going to come not from taxation or regular sources of revenue, but rather from land sales, which are kind of a one-off thing. And that's why the total revenue category is perhaps less indicative of overall operational performance, because that can't necessarily be repeated. So we try to look at it in different ways. So again, when we look at salaries as a percentage of revenue, we don't want to look at them as a percentage of total revenue, because total revenue tends to fluctuate quite a bit more than, say, tax revenue, which is very stable, as is staffing. Staffing tends to be fairly stable. So what we find here is that our expenditures relative to tax revenue at 63% means that for every dollar in tax we collect, we have 63 cents in expenditures related to staffing. This varies from municipality to municipality. Some are over 100%, both Taber and Lethbridge being at 118% and 114%, and others vary. The lowest being Lethbridge County at 50%.
Anybody from council has a question while we're going through this PowerPoint, please let them know.
Just one quick question, Mayor. Taber seems to skew the operational expenditures considerably compared to us, and probably the caveat to that is that they have their police department is municipally owned, and so that kind of changes those numbers quite dramatically.
Thank you for the question. Yeah, certainly it is a factor. Even with the policing removed, their numbers would still be on the high side relative to other municipalities. And they actually have, one of the things that's not included here is that, so for example, our RCMP contract is in a category known as contracted services. And so our contracted services value has policing in it, whereas theirs does not. And their contracted services typically in a given year are higher than ours, even though ours includes policing. So taking a look at the taxation and assessment category, just to give a sense of the relative value of properties, our total assessment comes in at $1,088,400,000. That's across both the residential and non-residential side. And our per capita net taxes available for municipal purposes comes in at just a shade over 1,000, which is in the low end of the various municipalities, with Ponoka being the only that is substantially lower at 933. When we're looking at taxation, we look at mill rate. So mill rate isn't a perfect example of tax rate because mill rate is what is applied to the value of properties to generate property tax. However, how it's changing year over year gives us an indication of the relative changes to tax rate. And so for that reason, we like taking a look at the statistic. One of the things when we look at it is to say property taxes tend not to change by a massive degree year over year. Certainly a little bit more in the last year, but just given inflation and things like that. But one of the things that we found here, when we began this analysis, the mill rate in Coaldale, out of the 9 municipalities, was ranked 9th. Back in, so we go back 4 years to 2019. So when we did the initial analysis, that would have taken us back to 2016. Coaldale would have been, from a residential perspective, the 9th ranked municipality, which is to say the last ranked municipality from a mill rate perspective. And now we find ourselves in the 5th rated position. Over the period from 2019 to 2022, our mill rate has only increased by 0.5%. This is not to say that the tax rate has increased because we've had some property value appreciation, but that's been true of other municipalities as well. And so what we still find is that the change over that period for Coaldale, we rank in 2nd, behind Lethbridge actually, which has had a general mill rate reduction, and that's because Lethbridge in the 2022 year in particular saw a substantial property value assessment increase. So I believe the average residential property in that year was up approximately 4.5%, which was not reflected in our assessment for that year. So I'm anticipating that we're going to move back into first place in 2023. On the non-residential side, since 2019, our mill rate has decreased by a factor of 3.2%, with only Lethbridge County being the only other municipality that's decreased, and the average for municipalities across the board being a 3.7% increase. So we rank first in the changeover period column, and from 2019 to 2022, we moved from 5th position to 3rd position. With a mill rate in 2022 at that 10.28 mark, the only 2 municipalities that are lower are Lethbridge County and Innisfail. So one of the things that's interesting is to look at Innisfail's value at 8.3 being substantially lower, coming back up The difference being that Innisfail, being almost 1,500 people less than Coaldale, has almost twice as much non-residential assessment. So they've got a fairly robust non-residential sector, and so even a lower mill rate applied to that value is still going to generate tremendous returns for a community of that size. Both Innisfail and Lethbridge County here have a star next to their name, which indicates that they, in addition to taxing the value of land and building, also have a tax on machinery and equipment, which is at that stated mill rate. The town of Coaldale does not have any tax on machinery and equipment. The next category is assessment growth, and what we see here, we look back through, this comes from the Alberta Equalized Assessment Database, which is published and includes every community throughout Alberta. And actually the 2023 valuation is provided here. I'm not sure how we get to 2023 number for a document that's published halfway through 2022, but this is how the province does things. What we find is that for this period, we've seen total assessment growth of about $280 million, which places us second overall, obviously behind Lethbridge and being a much larger town. But on a per capita basis, we've experienced over that period about $31,000 per person in increased property values in the town. So that's either because of new construction or the appreciation of value of individual properties. So when we take a look at that, when we think about adding in the value of property appreciation, consider that the value of property appreciation in Lethbridge has generally been higher than it has been in Coaldale, and certainly Lethbridge, Coaldale, and Taber are all within the same economic region. There's not much an individual council or administration can do to affect the regional economy. And even with that in mind, we still find ourselves in the range of triple what Taber has experienced and still substantially outperforming Lethbridge. So it suggests that investors are looking to Coaldale for a place to invest their dollars, which is good. Looking at population growth, I think the thing that stands out to me when we look at this chart is that we have 9 communities that we're analyzing, of which 2, one Lethbridge County and the other Lethbridge, aren't the same type of municipality. We have 7 municipalities, including Coaldale, that are towns. And what we find is that for this period from 2017 to 2021, we've had about 5% population growth. Obviously trailing Blackfalds, which is sort of the standard bearer of town population growth, though that has largely been in previous years. But one of the things that really stands out is looking at all of Innisfail, Edson, Drumheller, and Ponoka are in a negative growth position over this period. And Innisfail, Edson, Drumheller, and Ponoka are not small or extraordinarily rural. And so it points to the fact that it's certainly possible for a town the size of Coaldale to be shrinking. The fact that we're not, the fact that we're experiencing steady growth is a positive thing. And I think it's to continue to be reflected in terms of how we make our decisions, that we want to make sure that we remain a community that's experiencing that, because there are extreme challenges that come from regular population decline from municipality. Moving to the executive compensation benchmark, what we see here, one note, Taber and Edson both had periods where they had no CAO, and so they've been removed from the equation. So when we look at this, we find that we are, for all 3 categories, below the average in this field, with the CAO coming in 3% below average, the mayor 20% below average, and council 5% below average. The averages here being with the outliers removed. So we remove Lethbridge and Lethbridge County from these figures because they're really a fundamentally different scope. The councillors, or the mayor, tends to be full-time, the councillors as well in Lethbridge's case. So we pull those out when we're talking about those averages. We're not giving ourselves a free pass by including Lethbridge in them. We want to make sure they're more accurate in the reflection. These are not, so we recently had some increases on the elected official side. That's not reflected in these numbers because these would be from 2021's financial statements. Those will largely come out of the 2023 financial statements, so we're a few years away from really seeing those reflected in these values. So benchmark 6 is the crime severity index, and we talked to council about this fairly recently, but just to pull it out, what we're showing here is we've shown the crime severity index for 2021 in the second column here, and then we've also shown 2017. And the value that realistically I think is the most valuable for us in terms of analyzing the municipality is a 5-year average. And the reason for that is that in any one given year, there's the possibility of, just with the way the numbers work, with certain crimes weighting substantially. So a murder is substantially more egregious than a bike theft, for example. And so if something like that were to occur in a given year, it would create a spike that isn't necessarily reflective of a repeatable crime rate. So we wouldn't want to take it, we wouldn't want to overvalue that in terms of analyzing, where the community ranked relative to other communities from a safety perspective or from a property crime perspective. And so looking at a 5-year average, we find Coaldale coming in at 52.56. That is the lowest in the peer group by a substantial margin. The second lowest is actually Tabor, and they come in at 77.6. So again, almost a 50% increase in crime based on this index being required to get to the second lowest level of crime. Blackfall is also in that range. And then you find a number of municipalities that are above the national average. So the way the CSI works is 100 is the Canada average. 101.6, I believe, is the Alberta average, because Alberta has slightly higher crime rates than the average in Canada. So what you find is that Coaldale is substantially below the Alberta average, substantially below the Canadian average, and substantially below its peers by this metric. Just some lessons that administratively we tend to pull out of the report. I'm happy to take council's questions. One thing that council should be aware of: we are planning to come back to council probably in approximately a month's time with the actual published version of the report completed. At that point, we'll want to talk to council about a communication strategy for how to go about spreading the information, the report, in a way that makes sure that people hear the information they need to hear, but still also done in a sort of a tactful manner. So we're going to come back. John and I will put our heads together there and come back to council with that plan. We're anticipating probably the second meeting in February.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your comprehensive report. Very well done. Yeah, I think you just answered part of my question that I wanted to ask. So we're going to wait until after the February report before that we make this public then, or like it's public now obviously, but to advertise how well Coaldale's doing. We'll do that after that.
Yeah, correct.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? Okay, well, thank you very much. With that being said, could I get someone to make a motion that council receive the Q4 growth and investment report for information? Deputy Mayor Pickering. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Thanks, Cam. Moving on to correspondence. Agenda item 11.1, Municipal District of Tabor request for a letter of support to the Horsefly Emergency Spillway Project. Kaylin, not to put you on the spot, but could you give us a little bit of background on that?
Sure. The Southern Regional Drainage Committee is a multi-phase project that's looking at doing a number of stormwater infrastructure upgrades east of Coaldale here, and we recently tendered phase 1 of the project this fall, and unfortunately the total cost of the tender came in roughly $5 million more than the engineer's estimate. And in order to balance the budget from that shortfall, the province of Alberta allowed us to take funding from phases 2 and 3 of the project to cover the shortfall of phase 1 so that we could proceed to construction and award the project. Really what this letter is forecasting to the province is that there's now between taking the money from phases 2 and 3 for phase 1 and the continued projection of escalating costs between those two factors, they are signaling to the province that there's going to be a shortfall of $12 million $500,000 when you look at all three phases of the project. What they're wanting from us is to sign a letter of support. In turn, that'll be sent to the province of Alberta in their request for more funding. One other variable I will mention, there are still a couple of municipalities in the catchment area that benefit from this project that have not stepped forward as contributing partners. I stopped from naming names, but that is the essence of this letter. And my understanding is they're going to be sending this right up to Edmonton to the Premier of Alberta. This is a project where funds were also received from the federal government as well as the provincial government. And in the event that the Premier's office and the province of Alberta don't provide the $12,500,000, the fork in the road will be, are you going to proceed with phases 2 and 3? And if so, are the municipal partners going to pay the difference? That's the inevitable fork in the road in the event that this lobby effort is not successful.
Thank you. You didn't want to mention it, but I'll mention it. Do you know if they've met with Lethbridge and Medicine Hat yet?
I'm not aware of the most recent update.
Okay, thank you. Any questions, comments? Seeing none, could I get someone to entertain a motion that council provide a letter of support to the MD at Tabor for the Horsefly Emergency Spillway project? Councillor Chapman, any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call a question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you. That concludes the open portion of our meeting. I will need a motion at 6:31 p.m. that council move into closed session in accordance with section 197-4-B of the Municipal Government Act to discuss matters exempt from disclosure for items 13.1, 13.2, subject to section 17, personal privacy, item 13.2, subject to section 16, business interests of a third party. Can I get someone to make that motion, please? Councillor Beekman, thank you. That's at 6:31 p.m. Let's take a 10-minute break.